Hello and welcome to Going Deeper, where we go a little bit deeper in our most recent sermon series. Thank you so much for coming along. We have got great guests this evening. We've got Becky and we've got Phil, who are going to be joining us in just a moment. They're just in the waiting room, so I'll call them in a moment. Do say hi if you are watching on YouTube. Do say hi in the chats, and if at any point in this evening's chat you want to ask a question, then just pop it in there in the comments below, and we will hopefully be able to bring it up on screen and bring it to into our discussion. So let's bring in Becky and Phil. Hello, Becky. Hello, Phil. Good evening.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Yeah, all right, good. I was having technical issues. Trouble with using Apple instead of Microsoft, I think.
Yes.
But we got there.
You got there. You are here, and we can see you and we can hear you, and that is the main thing. So welcome. Thank you for coming. Becky, hello.
Hello. Very nice to see you.
Yes, it's a very, very sad occasion because this is your last time with us as an employee of Holy Baptist Church, because you will be on Tuesday.
It is. I'm emotional.
Do you want to just say quickly where you are off to and what you'll be doing?
Yes, so I am off to Andover. I'm joining the team with Andover Baptist Church, and I will be taking up a role called Next Steps Ministry Leader, which is about helping people within the church community to take ownership of their spiritual growth and to grow in their relationship with Jesus, and hopefully introduce some new people into that journey as well.
Sounds excellent. It's a great church, so and a great team. So I hope you have a very blessed time there. And but we will miss you. But
thank you. I will miss you guys hugely, but I'm glad we can stay connected.
Yes, which is a lot easier these days with digital stuff. And you have said you might even come back and preach.
I might, if you let me. See how tonight goes.
We'll definitely get you. So, Phil, is that your study? What's that map you've got on the wall behind you?
I don't know whether I ought to admit it. That's Middle Earth, I think, on the back wall. It's not Hawley, it's Middle Earth.
And it's not a biblical lands. It's
what?
It's not the biblical lands. It's from Lord of the Rings. Okay, that's fine. Well,
it is. I'm a bit of a geek. If you just look in the background, there may be a Jon Snow in the cabinet as well. Don't.
Well, once again, thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys for watching as well. Do put comments, do put questions, and we are going to be talking about this evening, address the mess. Life is messy, so let's talk about it. And I thought it'd be a good idea just to remind ourselves what we were looking at this last month, because I did sermon number 1. Becky, you did sermon number 3. Phil, you did sermon Becky didn't. Yeah, Becky did sermon number 2. Phil did sermon number 3, and then this morning we had Deborah doing sermon number 4. So we'll go around and just say what we spoke about really. So mine was the first one, introduction to the series. It was called Mess in the Mirror, and basically it was the idea that all of us are a mess. All of us have been in a mess, are in a mess, or about to be in a mess, and therefore we aren't in any position to judge someone for their messes. And I loved, so with this series is based on a series from North Point, and when I watched Andy's talk, which I have to admit mine was quite heavily based upon, he makes this connection between when you are aware of your messes, you're aware of an unmess that you're comparing it to, and that unmess is God. And so actually when you're in a mess, you're only just one step away from recognizing there is a God out there who sets an example. So yeah, that's my one. Becky, what was your one?
Yeah, so the big idea for week 2 was about the fact that it was for our mess that God moved in our direction, that actually our mess isn't something we need to hide from God or hide from, or hide if we want to come along to church or be part of church community, but actually it was the very reason that motivated Jesus's mission on earth. And Jesus pursued messy people, and he invited messy people to come and follow him. In fact, he seemed to deliberately pick the messiest people to come and follow him.
Yeah, that does seem to be a pretty common theme in the Bible. It tends to use up pretty messed up people, and God uses them to do amazing things. So yeah, thanks, Becky. Phil, what was your sermon on?
Yeah, so we were talking about the fact that we are messy, but that God doesn't want to leave us that way. If He's a good parent, parents love their kids, whatever they do, but they always have aspirations for them to change and to grow and to mature. So it was a sermon about growth, I suppose, about change and how God changes us and moves us from where we are to where He wants us to be, or where we need to be. So it was about that. So the catchphrase, again, nicked from Mr. Stanley, was God loves us just as we are, but He loves us too much to leave us that way. And it's about change, really, and how that happens, and what does it mean to what sort of change is He trying to create in us. And we were talking about love, that we grow in love.
Yeah.
And that's the transformation He's looking for.
Yeah. Daniel just put in the comments, says, us being in a mess isn't always our fault, though. And actually, that very much brings us to our final part in our series, where we looked at the story of David, who was running away from King Saul, who wanted to murder him. And he had an opportunity to sort everything out. The mess that was being made, he was on the run. Everything was falling apart. And he wanted to, it was that temptation to make the mess better, to clear it up. But actually, by killing Saul, he would have made it even messier. So it talked about how do we stop making our lives a mess? How do we draw boundaries that stop things from getting worse and worse? So yeah, sometimes the mess isn't our fault, but it is our responsibility not to make the mess worse.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned that the reality is, if you become a Christian, weirdly, you invite a certain degree of mess into your life, don't you? Because I think Jesus' life was, well, it wasn't easy. I mean, I suppose if we're talking about messiness and easiness, or challenges and difficulties, but following Jesus creates some mess, doesn't it? In a weird, a good mess. There is good mess, I think.
Yeah. Jesus could have just lived his life as a carpenter, inventing the table and chairs, which he did in Mel Gibson's version of the story. And his life could have been pretty mess-free, but that wasn't what his calling was on his life, was it?
I thought that was IKEA who invented the table and chair. Was it not?
Possibly.
Other brands are available.
We're not advertising. Yes, Phil, sponsored by IKEA.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We had to get the name in. We've done it now. We're fine. We're okay. We're covered.
Yeah.
But I think there is a messiness about being a Christian, is there? In the hospital, weirdly, the Christians have tons of questions. Why is this happening to me? What's going on? But if you don't have a faith and you don't believe in a good, loving Heavenly Father, you don't have that mess to deal with, because it's just, well, that's life, isn't it?
It's interesting. I was doing some reading up on Buddhism, because that's what ministers do, and they've very much got that idea that bad stuff's going to happen. So just if you want to be happy, just don't think you're going to be happy. Basically, things are going to happen. Whereas I think as Christians, we can have expectation that sometimes our faith is going to sort everything out, and everything's going to be fine and dandy. So when things do go wrong, I think, well, have I done something wrong? Has someone done something wrong to me? We're always looking for maybe a reason behind the mess that we've found ourselves in, if we're not blaming ourselves.
It's interesting how I'm sure we've all had some kind of conversation with somebody who doesn't perhaps share the same faith that we do, where they kind of land at this idea that, like, we've all heard the phrase, like, oh, faith is like a crutch, or like, oh, well, if that helps you, if that gives you a little bit of like peace and some meaning at the end of the day. And actually the kind of picture that we've been painting in this series, and particularly in your week, Phil, as you say, about kind of like, actually it's going to invite mess, it's going to create difficulties, and like faith isn't always a help. Faith is often a very, very difficult decision to make in the face of like quite complicated circumstances. It's harder to push through with a belief in a good God who walks with you. and it's harder to embrace a life where you've got to go, like, you've got to walk alongside the messy people. Like, you haven't got the option of like, okay, that's too complicated, I'm walking away now, that's going to take up too much of my time. Like, that's what Jesus is inviting us into. And I think I've been challenged in this series that I want people to see my faith as something not that's just like, oh, a nice hopeful addition to my life, but something that is actually moving my life into something that's like a lot richer but a lot messier, and that I'm walking in that direction, and be interested in that. And I think often we want to present a very tidy, neat version of Christianity, but you look at the early church, not tidy and neat.
I wonder how much of that is, and I'm speaking for a particular group of Christians, which unfortunately make up the majority of Christians in our country, which is the middle class Christians. And part of being middle class, I think, is often being sorted, being neat and tidy, you know, washing our BMWs on our front lawns, which are nicely cut. And when we tend to enter church, we become the people who are doing well. We're the ones that offer the help. We're the ones that all those messed up people come to, and we can offer our charity, we can offer our help, we can offer their advice, we can sort out their finances, we can sort out their legal problems, we can sort out their relationships. Well, actually, what we're doing is trying to hide our own messes and not recognize that we're just as messed up as anyone else, until we can't contain it anymore, and suddenly we find out that such and such across the road is having an affair, or whatever. Yeah.
And I think that's good, isn't it? I think that's one of the good things about this series, is it recognizes that I think there's a weird idea out there, particularly outside the church, that Christians are, you know, they're better somehow. They're better people. The reality is, for most of us, we're forgiven, but we're still a bit of a mess, some of us. And God is still at work on us. You know, there's lots to do, and I think that's a good place to be, because I think that's a place of honesty. And unless you know there's some work to be done, you don't do the work. So I think it's a good place to be. But there is a weird idea, isn't it, that Christians, and we set it up that way, don't we? You know, come to Jesus and he'll fix your life. Oh, yeah. All right. It's not quite that simple. He does start fixing things, but sometimes we want to lock the door and keep him out and say, "Don't go in there." You know, and it's a bit messy sometimes. And he
tends to move things around, doesn't he? And and
the mess up, which is really annoying. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Jesus messes things up that we've tried to get in order and we're comfortable with, and he messes it all up. I sincerely believe that Christ makes our life better.
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing. And often we think better means not messy, ordered, everything's great, everything goes well. And that's never what Jesus promised.
No. It's not easier. He doesn't make it easier, but you walk through life with a partner who's on this project of transformation with you, and you don't do it alone, and you have some resources that you never had before. And there's all sorts of, but it's not easier. Ask Jesus if his life was easy. Definitely not.
No, definitely not. So, go on, Becky. What you got to say?
I was just going to say that I really like that word project, and I think you used it in your message. And to me, it's like really helpful, simple language for like the journey that begins when you say yes to Jesus. Project is that's what I was going to say. I just like that language. I think so. And sometimes once you have a word for something, it just helps it to like, oh, okay, like it makes more sense to you, and it's helpful to share with others. I think that sort of language. So I appreciate that, Phil. Thanks for using that vocabulary.
Well, I like it because you mentioned the week before I got there. You mentioned the idea that this isn't a quick fix. This isn't a trip down to Waterstones and, you know, read 500 pages from the self-help department and you'll be fine. It doesn't work like that. Jesus says, and in my life, I've realized that how do people change? Because that was my topic, that idea of transformation from the inside out. it's really hard to change. I've discovered that. I've been doing some counselling for a few years, and change is a big issue in the counselling world, because how do people change? And it's a really big one, but it is a lifelong process, and it's not like you were saying in your week. It's something that takes a long time, and it's a lifelong project. It doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And one day we'll see him face to face, and he'll finish the job. But between now and then, it's a partnership between us and him, isn't it?
Yeah. Phil, on that, with your expertise around counselling and some of the stuff you've done, I've heard it said that research has shown that actually people don't really change once they get past their teens and stuff. They don't really change. Have you heard that said? And how does that fit with this whole sort of Christian walk and stuff?
Yeah, I don't know. I think Christianity shows us how people change, and I think Jesus does it brilliantly. Because if you think about your own conversion, that's an old word, isn't it? That's what you do to your house, isn't it? But you know, when you came to faith, when Jesus said, "Follow me," and you said, "All right, then," not really knowing what that meant. I've got to be honest, none of us do when we say yes. Neither did the disciples. They had a right roller coaster coming down the road at them, but they went for it, and so did I. But when you start that process, I think the reason we start the process is one of the reasons why he helps us to change, is because we fall in love with someone who we know is for us, unconditionally for us. And that unconditional love, what Carl Rogers in the person-centered theory says is unconditional positive regard. That's what he calls it.
Sorry, the person-centered theory, that sounds very highbrow.
Well, it's very counselly, that is.
Very counselly, okay.
Yeah, there's different schools of counselling, and a lot of them are person-centered counsellors. This his whole school of counselling.
Yeah.
But this guy called Carl Rogers, who incidentally, whose parents were Christians, and he ducked. Well, I don't think he did, but I think he thought he ducked Christianity. But his whole theory is based around grace, really, grace and truth. Because he says, if you create an atmosphere of grace, unconditional positive regard, he calls it UPR, unconditional positive regard, we call it grace.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And you also create an environment of truth where people can speak truth into your life. Then that's when people grow and change, because you create that atmosphere where they can be themselves, but they can also be honest about where they're at. And if you can create a safe space, that's when people grow. And that's what Jesus does with us when he calls us, isn't it? He says, I love you. I don't care what you've done or where you've been or even what you will do. I love you, full stop. And I'll never stop doing that. But let's have a conversation about some stuff that we need to sort out. And stuff that's hurting you and hurting your friends and hurting your relationships. And he says, let's talk about that as well. So that's part of the deal as well. So truth and grace, it says, doesn't it? He came full of truth and grace. And he somehow manages to blend those two in a way that helps people change, I think. And they say in counselling, that's exactly the same principle, that the therapeutic relationship between a counsellor and a client is the most effective tool for change. It's not the theories you use or the techniques or the kits you buy on the internet. It's none of that stuff. It's the relationship between you and the client that enables change to happen. And it's what Jesus has done with us. Jesus got there first, and then a bunch of counsellors wrote a load of books and wrote it down. So Jesus did it first, I think.
Yeah. And that I love that. And that's one that just shows us how Jesus works with us, but also it's such a challenge to what sort of environments are we creating within our churches. And by church, I don't mean buildings. I mean the people who gather together and join together at worshipping God. And that could be a home groups. It could be Sunday mornings. It's a real challenge, isn't it? Becky, what's your experience of churches doing that well? And do you have experiences of churches doing that badly because we talk about grace and truth, and we probably struggle to get those two together, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. Before I do that, it'd be really interesting to hear in the chat how people have experienced, like, what has been something that's helped you go through a process of change?
Yeah.
And what are you hoping is going to start changing in your life, maybe off the back of some of the stuff we've talked about in this series?
Yeah.
But I think the being honest, the church has a reputation. We need to be honest with ourselves about the reputation of the church at large. And it's a shame because it's a reputation that often doesn't carry through when you actually go down to like how people actually interact with maybe their local church or people that they know. But the church by and large has a reputation for truth at the expense of grace. And maybe not, but the actual problem with that is it's truth for us, but it's not something that's perceived as truth to a world that doesn't acknowledge God as Deborah was talking about today, as God as King.
Yeah.
So when we introduce truth from God to somebody who doesn't acknowledge God as King, that's always going to come as an unwelcome kind of judgment call on somebody else that's uninvited. I think that there's also I've definitely experienced church environments where we think we're doing grace well, but what we really mean is that we're not getting involved. So we're sort of just like keeping people at a little bit of a different distance, being kind, being nice, being welcoming and friendly, but also not wanting to really wade into the mess, because the truth part of that is really hard and hard to navigate, but also because grace is a messy activity. Grace to that. Well, now, what was that phrase you've just used? UPR. What is it?
Yeah, it's called unconditional positive regard.
Unconditional positive regard for somebody who's not unconditionally positive, for example, that's a messy journey to walk through. To regard someone positively, unconditionally.
I struggle with that.
To walk through many different conditions with them. Because if you're not walking through the different conditions of their life and the different conditions you find them in, you're not, that's not grace. That's just kind of turning a blind eye to what's actually going on in the lives of others. So I think there's a challenge there in terms of, wading in.
It is, isn't it? And I think it requires a degree of intimacy. And that's what's challenging. And that intimacy takes vulnerability and takes time and takes living, with other people and being part of their lives and them being part of you and them seeing you for who you are and you seeing them for who they are. And being able to speak truth into someone's life requires all that. Otherwise, it goes horribly wrong. Try telling someone a few home truths if you haven't got a really good relationship with them. That's going to go down well.
Even if you have got a really good relationship with them, it's still not going to go down very well. And that's why we don't do it.
It's hard enough doing it then, isn't it? Being honest with each other. So relationship is the key to all of this happening. But it does require that intimacy. It's much harder than just sort of, spouting stuff off, isn't it? Or telling everybody what to do from a distance.
This is why I became a church minister.
I know. I always feel like that when I'm preaching. I'm thinking like I'm stood up here telling all you people, and do we know each other? Where's the level of trust for that to happen? It's a bit of a challenge sometimes, isn't it? Which is why fellowship and becoming a fellowship and really, living life together is part of the process, I think, of change for us.
And I wonder sometimes what it's our motive as well. Why are we telling people the truth? And sometimes it's because we don't like their mess and we'd rather not have a mess around. So if we sort your mess out, one, I feel better, and two, you won't mess up everything around me. So that can be our motive, which is incredibly unkind, and it's not for them at all, it's for us. And I think if people can feel like we're for them and we want them to improve and to get better and to grow and to get themselves out of maybe a hole that they've got themselves in, I think maybe they can receive it a little bit better, and particularly if we're not coming judgmentally. But that's easier said than done, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's that first that goes back to that first thing we talked about in this series, is that being messy is something we all share in common.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to remember that and reach back into times where our lives have been messy when we want to go and engage with somebody else whose life is messy. I've just been reading a really interesting book called The Open Church by Jürgen Moltmann.
Oh, Jürgen Moltmann. Oh, my goodness me.
Oh, that's a heavy one.
Yeah. So he's absolutely fascinating because he was working out what it means to be a follower of Jesus off the back of World War II. And he had experience he was a prisoner of war. So he'd experienced all sorts of mess, none of which was of his own making. But of course, he's also a human being. He'd also walked through messy situations of his own making. But the biggest thing that struck me from that book was he was talking about as the church and as followers of Jesus, we have a tendency to create an us and them between us, the church, and those who have been following Jesus for a long time, and the world out there, and the people out there who we're trying to reach. And we tend to interact with them in a sort of us and them dynamic. And he was saying it's an important art that we all have to master, to reach back into our own lives to when we were the people. When we were the ones who needed somebody to come along and share hope with us, when we were the ones who needed somebody to come along and put an arm around us and help us, and to kind of approach people from that place. So he said, like, for him, the time in his life where he was most one of the people was when he was in a prisoner of war camp, because there everybody's in the same mess, everybody's in the same place. And he throughout his life would always try to reach back in his mind to that time and sort of speak and approach people from that place where he's understanding and coming alongside the place that they're in, because we've all, all of us will have different experiences and different messes, and some people are dealt a much more difficult hand than others, but all of us do have this level of common experience, and particularly when it comes to creating messes for ourselves and getting things wrong. And we've got to stay connected to that, even as we leave it behind. Even as you follow Jesus and say, I'm putting that stuff behind, we have to stay connected to the fact that was us, that was our story. And it still is our story to a certain extent. And that's Jesus, that's, even though Jesus didn't come and he wasn't a sinful person like we are, he came and identified himself with us. And that practice of identifying ourselves with somebody before we try and lead them anywhere is that's something that Jesus modeled, and something I think
that's certainly something that's a good mental exercise for us, isn't it? Is to, when we see someone who's in a mess, actually before launching ourselves in, to spend that time identifying with that person and trying to put ourselves in their shoes, try to understand maybe some of the reasons behind it before making those judgments and going into to sort everything out. Michelle has said, I think people can change past teenage years. 2 years ago, despite having faithy life, life was a mess, but a Facebook post from a friend brought me to God, and now I know he's fighting with me and others. So Michelle's obviously a person that life was a mess, but she's found some hope in a mess. I don't know whether, Michelle, life has got less messy, or you've just found hope and an anchor and a foundation within that mess. But no, that's great. Thank you, Michelle.
Also, I really want to know what the Facebook post was. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. So you guys can make a difference to someone's life just through sharing a Facebook post, or sharing something that is of truth and grace on Facebook. It could change someone's life. So well done.
No, and I think that's the danger, isn't it? That we talk about change and how hard it is. It is hard. It's not easy. I know in my life change has been, but I think you get a sort of slight turbocharge when you come to Jesus, because you just start to see the world differently, and your priorities change, and all that shifts quite quickly sometimes. And that's the foundation on which you build some of that change as well. A different way of seeing life and what matters, and how you're viewed as well. Because I think that's a way we change. I think knowing that we are loved is a starting point for change, really.
Yeah. I remember hearing that if you want to lose weight, the best approach to lose weight is to be okay with who you are. Because until you're okay with who you are, you don't feel able to lose the weight, which is a bit odd. Often we think, well, if I just make this person feel really bad about being fat, then they'll go and feel really guilty and lose weight. But actually, that doesn't work. We need to be in a secure position where we're have unconditional positive regard. I love that phrase. Thank you, Phil. And then you feel able to sort things out. You feel in the right place to be able to get on top of life.
And that's a lot of people's testimony, is actually when they start to see themselves as God sees them, which is not perfect. And it's like you said all through the series, none of us are perfect.
No.
And anybody who thinks they are, needs therapy straight away, so I'll leave a card at the door. But the reality is, the moment you see yourself as God sees you, it changes everything, because I think that's the starting point for growth and for change. And I think, so weirdly, it's really odd, but loving yourself as you are, as God does, is a start for, and now let's not leave ourselves that way.
Yeah, and you picked that up in your sermon, didn't you, on that, love God, love others, and yourself, and you made that point of picking on that yourself. That's really important, because you can't really move on.
It's staggering how many people are their worst critic and are really quite harsh about themselves, if not in public, but certainly behind the scenes, and if you don't like yourself, it's very hard to move from that position. But to believe something positive about yourself, and to know that you are loved and you are valuable, and God values you, and He's proved it, hasn't He?
Yeah.
In remarkable ways.
Yeah, Jenny says one thing that can be a struggle is the guilt and shame from past mess or current mess, which then can keep you down and keep you messy. Yeah. But if you've got someone who's trying to say, no, actually, you are a good person, there are good things about you, there is ways we can sort this out, then that can help us to feel a lot better and able to face the change that's required, I guess.
Because shame is toxic, isn't it? It doesn't. There's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says I've done something wrong. Shame says I am wrong, and that's just toxic. And that's where we get stuck. And if you believe that, it's a contradiction of what God says about us. God says you may have done some stuff that's wrong, but you are not wrong. You are dearly loved and highly valued, and you matter. And that challenges the shame that gets us stuck.
I think one of the biggest lies we can end up believing, particularly when we have created some mess, is that the future will always be like the past, that the future will always be like the present, that I'm always, and that's that shame component, like you say, Philip, that belief, I'm always going to do this, I'm always going to create this mess, I'm never going to be able to do anything different. And that's in direct contradiction to the promises of that in the New Testament, that when you say yes to having Jesus be your leader, be the person who you're going to walk through life with, and when He comes and walks alongside you, it means that the future does not have to be like the past, that you're something new, and that there are you may not even be able to imagine the future with God, because it's going to be so different from the past that you made when you were just you. And I think that's something all of us, and that's why community is so important, that we have other people to combat that lie that because we did it, we're going to do it again. And that doesn't have to be the case. And of course, there are lots of practical things that we'll need to do to move through that. And there are going to be times where we think we've had a setback, But that does, even then, if that happens, that doesn't mean we've gone back to being who we used to be. And yes, yeah.
Thanks, Becky. Just a question, which I don't think we've really picked up on in this series. We talked about, and tonight we've been talking about creating unconditional positive regard, that sort of environment, these places, these relationships where people feel affirmed and therefore able to get themselves out of the mess. We talked about the example of Jesus and God and what that unmess looks like. But where does the Holy Spirit come in to all this? Because we're not just reading the Bible as a self-help book. We're not just using Jesus as an example. We're not just being nice to one another. Where does the Holy Spirit and the gift of the Holy Spirit come in to all this?
Well, it's the good news that Jesus said, I'm going away, and I'm going to send you a helper. And that's kind of the first language that we get for the idea of God's presence coming to be with us, coming to live with us and within us and change us from the inside out, is that I'm going to help you. I'm not going to leave you by yourself. And there's something about our human nature which is inclined towards mess and inclined towards messiness, and that's because we're inclined towards ourselves. And this is kind of coming back to that beginning bit about kind of the way that we create mess, and the fact that mess exists actually kind of, it does teach us something about the nature of existence. It teaches us something about the existence of God, because it's an interesting thing to see that as we focus on ourselves, we create mess. Because you would think that, like, you know, in a purely like materialistic view of the universe, that wouldn't be the case, that it would actually work differently to that. But sorry, right, sidetrack. So God gives us his presence with us to help us move in the direction, as we submit more and more to him, to move in the direction of wanting what he wants and wanting what he wants for others, rather than living a self-centered life. And the more that we submit over to him, the more he is shaping us from the inside out, that we're not straining to change and straining to be different. But, you know, like Romans 12 is one of my favorite passages, which talks about God working in us to teach us that talk about his good, pleasing and perfect will, and that we're being renewed from the inside, that we might live out God's good, pleasing and perfect will. And the reason I love that is because the first time someone hears about what God wants in their life, they often go, that's not good, pleasing or perfect to me. But there's something that happens as we give more of our lives over to God, that the things he wants for us become the things we actually desire from the inside out. We're not faking it. We're actually being changed from the inside out. And there's a level of mystery to that. And I think that's pretty cool as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think you're right. I think that helper image is really useful, isn't it? Because I think we all struggle. A lot of people struggle with that, with help, asking for help. Do you struggle with asking for help?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm terrible. I'm useless. And it's all about how you were parented and stuff like that. But you grew up and you either rely on everybody else to sort everything out all the time and never take any initiative, or, and there's shade to this, or you're the other end of the spectrum where here's a problem, I've got to fix it because nobody's coming to my rescue, I've got to go and sort it out. And it stems back to how you were parented. But the reality is I'm on the I've got to sort this out end of the spectrum, and I'm not used to asking for help, and I hate asking for help. Doesn't come naturally. But Jesus says, I'm going to send you a helper, so you better use him. You better actually rely on him. And that, for some of us, with certain, the way we've developed, some of us, that's really hard to ask for help. But I think that's what it is. And it's this idea of a partnership. It's not all God. God doesn't say, you just sit there and I'll go, there you go, you're completely transformed. How's that? He doesn't do that. I wish he would. That'd be a lot easier.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he asks us to take some initiative, but not to do it all on our own, because he knows that we can't, and we need yeah, we need some sort of spiritual power in our lives to change us and to do something a little bit supernatural, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because change is hard, and it does take that. So it is this partnership between God and me. I do. So what was it once? Somebody once said, "Pray like it all depends on God, and act like it all depends on you." And I think that's a good balance of the two things. Where you say, "God, do everything you can," and at the same time, you're doing everything you can, and somewhere between the two, there's a great power in that. You're not doing it on your own.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I think we'll draw our conversation to a close on that, because I love that God just wants to help us, and we need to be willing to ask for help from God and for others, and God's more than willing. And as followers of Jesus, are we willing to help others as well? So thank you, Becky. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Deborah, as well, for this series. It's been a really good one. So, guys, if you've missed any of the parts, do catch up on our YouTube channel. It's really worth a watch and a listen. It's been a really good series. Becky, so we're going to say bye to you, but we will see you again. You're not...
Indeed.
Yes. So thank you so much for all that you have done, and thank you for sorting out this series as well, because you put this together based on the North Point one, and actually you, in our March series, you've put that one together as well, even though you're not going to be here.
From a distance, yeah.
Yes. So there will be a series in March which Becky's put together. So we look forward to that one. And yeah, Phil, thank you so much for all you're done. And so guys, thank you for watching. Do say hi in the comments if you haven't done so already, and do share this, like it, share it, stick it on social media, encourage your friends and acquaintances to watch it, and maybe catch up on the series as well. So
let's live it out, right?
Sorry?
And let's live it out, you know?
Let's live it out. Yeah, this
whole
thing is about living it out, and with God's help. And let's try and make a difference where we are. So thank you, guys, and enjoy enjoy your rest of your evening. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks so much, Martin.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
See you later.